So one of the spires that in fact trace their origins to the Moluccas include the pandan leaves. As you can see on the screen, pandan comes from the Malay word pandan. So it is believed that the pandan leaves trace its origin, its native to the Moluccas, eventually popularized across Southeast Asia and used extensively in Southeast Asian as well as in South Asian cuisine. So the Moluccas are not just known for producing pandan and having been discovered on those islands, but then apart from pandan, we also have some of the fruits that were in fact found in the Malay archipelago and later introduced to islands such as Ceylon as well as to various other countries. So I'm sure many of you are able to kind of recognize the fruits which are quite popular in Sri Lanka as well, because it's basically a commercial, those are commercial crops, in fact cultivated in our country as well. You have durian, you have rambutan, and then you have the purple mangosteen, right? So all three, in fact, trace their origins to the Malay archipelago, introduced to the country during the colonial period, and that's the reason why I emphasize the whole idea of colonialism and the Portuguese, the Dutch, and the British occupying those islands. So durian, rambutan, and mangosteen. Again, when it comes to etymology, all three fruits, in fact, trace their origins not just to the Malay archipelago, but the names, the terms are also of Malay origin. So talking about durian, as you can see, the outer rind of the fruit has got prickly thorns. So in Malay, duri means thorns, right? So prickly thorns that you can see on the outer rind of the fruit. So durian, so an is actually a noun building suffix. So duri plus an is durian. So it's basically to refer to the fruit that has got prickly thorns on its outer rind. Then talking about mangosteen, again mangosteen also traces origins to the Malay archipelago. It comes from the Malay word mangoose, which is still popularly used by the Malays to identify the fruit. And next you have rambutan. I'm sure that many of you have tasted rambutan. So rambutan gets its name again from Malay words. So rambut means hair. So as the fruit's outer rind has hair-like protuberances, you have rambut, and an, as I mentioned earlier in the case of durian, is a noun-building suffix. So rambut plus an is rambutan. And another explanation behind the origin of the word rambutan is that it's a combination of the words rambut and utan. So rambut is again hair, and utan means jungle, as you know that these islands are full of tropical jungles. So rambut utan is actually a hairy jungle when you translate it to English. So when were these fruits introduced to the island? As I mentioned earlier, it was mainly during the colonial period. So each fruit had its own origin. So talking about durian, durian was introduced to the island during the Portuguese colonial era. So how do I basically say it was during the Portuguese colonial era? Thanks to the gentleman whom you see on the screen, James Emerson Tennant. I'm sure that many of you might have come across his writings. He was in fact the 5th colonial secretary to Ceylon, and he was also the acting governor of Ceylon in the mid-19th century. And in his writings that were published in 1859, he in fact makes references to durian having been cultivated in the island. He says they were first introduced by the Portuguese, but then the Portuguese did not consider it as a commercial crop. And then later, during the British colonial period, in the 1830s and 1840s onwards, they cultivated it as a commercial crop. Now that's the case of durian. Durian is also called the king of fruits in Southeast Asia, and is a very popular delicacy. It smells like hell, but tastes like heaven, and it is a sought after fruit among the British governors and officials of our country as well. So it's a foul-smelling fruit, but it tastes delicious. So one of those who in fact testified to the taste of durian is none other than the 16th British governor to the island. As you can see on the screen, Governor Arthur Hamilton Gordon, Lord Stanhope. He in fact loved durian to the extent that he said there is nothing to beat a good durian. So this is in fact recorded in the Horticultural magazine published in the 1880s, and we in fact also had durian planted in the Pera, the near Royal Botanical Gardens. We had samples sent to exhibitions that were held in Madras as well as in London and in other far-flung colonies. And the gentleman, as I mentioned, Sir James Emerson Tennant, also talks about mangosteen as well as rambutan. So he says that rambutan is also found in the gardens of native squires. So if you read the writings of Sir Solomon Dyer's Bandaranaika, the grandfather of the former President Chachika, Bandaranaika Kumaratunga, he in fact makes references to having rambutan trees in his garden. So the native squires, the wealthy aristocrats of our country, the landed gentry, in fact had rambutan trees in their sprawling estates. Likewise, Mangosteen was in fact cultivated in the island according to James Emerson Tennant. In the 1830s and 40s, there were plantations in Pandan as well as in Colombo. So I will not go into much detail with regard to the history and cultivation. So, talking about the spices that trace their origins to the Moluccas, I think we should obviously mention the three most important spices that you can see on the screen. We have nutmeg, known in Malay as buah kepala. I'm sure all the aunties here know how to use buah kepala in terms of preparing their dishes. And then you have mace, which is basically the outer covering, the aril, which is like a net-like outer covering of the nutmeg seed, which is also used for flavoring in Southeast Asia as well as in South Asian cuisine. And then you have cloves. So cloves also trace their origin to the Moluccas. And that's the reason why the European powers went all the way to what is present-day Indonesia, looking for all these spices. And this resulted in fact, wars were fought for centuries between European powers, between the Dutch and the Portuguese and other European powers who in fact tried to take control over the islands because of the fact that these islands produced these precious commodities which were highly prized and sought after in Europe. And that's the reason why the Portuguese first arrived, and thereafter the Spanish and the Dutch and the French and the British and almost all European powers during the age of exploration went looking for all these islands to find these precious treasures like nutmeg and mace and cloves. So talking about cloves, let's first focus on archaeological findings. So in 2018, there was an archaeological research conducted in Mantai. I'm not sure how many of you have in fact come across Mantai. It served as an important trade center, trading port in the pre-colonial times. It's in the northwestern coast of the island, as you all can see, close to Mena. And in Mena, basically. So Mantai was a place, it played a pivotal role as a trade hub. So as you all know, given the strategic positioning of Sri Lanka is located at the nexus of major maritime routes. So since time immemorial, Sri Lanka has played a pivotal role in maritime trade, security, as well as in politics. So we have traders who came from Arabia, from Africa, from the Indian subcontinent, from Southeast Asia, looking for spices to Ceylon. So it is believed, based on the research that has been carried out, it is found that they found one clove and few black pepper. Now black pepper comes from Kerala, right? So you have clove that traces its origin to the Moluccas. So we have in fact traded clove and black pepper in the 9th, 10th, 11th century. So based on this one clove that was discovered, they have in fact estimated that it is at least between the 10th and the 12th centuries. So during that time we have been using cloves, and it is surmised by historians that it was probably brought to the island by Indian or Arab traders and later taken to Europe and introduced to other parts of the world by the traders who served as intermediaries or as middlemen